Good. Wow. My name is Patrick Justice, and I'd like to welcome you to the last night of the last lecture series. It's going to be a great night.
Woo!
Tonight, I personally, one of my favorite lecturers, have the honor of introducing Wendy Martyna. Wendy Martyna.
Yeah.
Wendy Martyna, let's say it right. I'd like to give you guys a little bit of a background for Wendy Martyna. She was born in Los Angeles, receiving her PhD from Stanford in psychology in 1978. The same year, she began her career here at UCSC, first as an assistant professor in psychology and women's studies, and later as a lecturer in psychology and sociology, after she decided on a life of teaching rather than combining teaching and research. From 1995 until now, she's been a continuing lecturer, primarily teaching courses in social psychology for the sociology department, but also in literature and for the Cal, Merrill, and Kresge College core courses. Her current sociology courses include Death and Dying, Family and Society, Language and Social Interaction, Sex and Gender, Sociology of Men, Societal Psychology, and Social Justice. She's won the Campus-Wide Excellence in Teaching Award in 2003 and was selected as commencement speaker for both Stevenson in 1982 and Cal in 2007. It's my greatest pleasure to invite Wendy Martyna. One, she loves to learn.
There's nothing to test it, but you can take notes on construction. I like that. First of all, there's not enough construction people in college. You notice that? I would think virtually a dearth of construction people would think that. Really. And you go into classrooms and where's the art on the walls? So I try to bring things into the classroom, and you'll find out what the teaching is for. Also, it's not a raffle, so don't worry about the number. Oh, I should do that. I should just make up a number and see that would be fun. And this up here is Mr. Rogers, who I'm going to talk about, and who is, for me, a great example of a true teacher. And this is Leo Muscaria. And I was so honored to be in his first ever love class. At USC Experimental College. It was 1968, and it was a time when people could teach whatever they wanted and take whatever they wanted in this accompanying college called Experimental College. Leo was a professor of special education, but really what he taught was love. And we sat on the floor in a circle, 40 of us, and we talked about love. And this is a very unusual picture of Leo. We became dear friends, and he was over at my house for dinner, and my boyfriend at the time took that picture, and I treasured it because you rarely saw the serious side of Leo. He's so well known for his grin and his smile. This is something my daughter brought back when she was traveling in South America, Ser Persona, which means to be human, one of his books about love. He died of a heart attack the last day of class when I was teaching sociology of love in classroom unit 2. You know how big that is, 240 people. And as I stayed at the end of that last class and hugged people, and I thought, this I began with Leo. I wanted to bring him, to honor him, since what I'm talking about is listening to all this. Having taught a course for more than 30 years in Death and Dying, I have no resistance to giving a last lecture. The premise of that course, and some of you have been in it or have been in it in the past, is that it is impossible to live a fully realized or meaningful life if one does not take account of mortality. In other words, realize that we're going to die, all of us. And the question then is, how do we go about the business of being here, alive, on the way to that? So I have great admiration for Randy Hush, the man who inspired this lecture series at this campus and all over the country. You can find lots of his lectures online, and his lectures as well. He was a man who, at the age of 47, was given a quote-unquote terminal diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, a few months to live, And instead of mourning his life only, of course he mourned his foreshortened life, of course he did. But instead of only that, he decided to use his time to consolidate the lessons of a life and to speak those lessons. And so he gave, truly, a well-named last lecture and started off with a joke about, usually this wouldn't be accurate, but in fact, it is. He ended up living a lot longer than he thought. But I have great admiration for him. He spoke with great verve and passion and aliveness about what it is to be facing our mortality. And of course, the truth is we're all dying, and we're also all living. And that's the focus, is all living. Some of the other speakers in this series talked about being here now and only not knowing. Those are the other two titles. And I think those are useful messages, especially for a university audience, where the focus is so much on not being here now, but thinking about the future, preparing for the future, living in a distant time that you're preparing yourself for, forgetting to be here now. You're being prepared for a future, so many of you, and everyone who's not part of the university now, there's people in the room that are not, also know what it is to be living for the future, whether it's the next hour or the next decade. And I think the be here now is a message that we need to hear. It's a useful counterpoint. And to not know is certainly a counterpoint to the message that we get in the university. You better know. You'll be tested on what you know. I was here to teach you something, so you better know. No. So these pressures, I think, on being there then, whether that there is the past or the future, stand in contrast to the message of being here now, and the message also of not knowing stands in contrast to that message of no. We don't even have midterms anymore. Why do they call them tri-terms or quad-terms? 3 or 4 midterms. Test. Well, I'm feeling the impulse to stop and read this one. I get those moments a lot. It brings artistry into the classroom, it brings the poetic, it brings the artistic, it brings the essential, it brings the other ways of knowing that we also have to attend to. And this is a poem by Wendy. It's called The Vacation. Once there was a man who filmed his vacation. He went flying down the river in his boat with his video camera to his eye, making a moving picture of the moving river, upon which his sleek boat moved swiftly toward the end of his vacation. He showed his vacation to his camera, which pictured it, preserving it forever, the river, the trees, the sky, the light. The bow of his rushing boat, behind which he stood with his camera, preserving his vacation even as he was having it, so that after he had had it, he would still have it. It would be there. With a flick of a switch, there it would be. But he would not be in it. He would never be in it. Yeah. Oh, we must be in Santa Cruz. How about a round of applause for me? So my message is also counterpoint, and the counterpoint is learning to always learn. You see, always learn suggests an ongoingness, a perpetuity, a continuation, always learning. Not a stopping point, not a graduation from an institution of higher learning. My message is that life is an institution of higher learning. And the minute you graduate, you will know that. And more than ever. I quit school. I went back. I dropped out of college. I went back. I found out that I had more possibility of learning and teaching and writing and talking in ways that I wanted to talk inside the university than I did outside the university. So how can we learn to always learn? That's the question. First of all, just a small story. When I was in college, when I had gone back to school, to finish up that all-important senior year so I could actually get the BA, so that I could get the PhD, which I knew I wanted at that point, so that I could be a college teacher. I was listening to classical music. I was listening to Eric Satie. And Eric Satie was known to me because his music was the soundtrack for a movie. That was automatic. But I didn't know anything about classical music, and I always felt like I was missing something. That I needed to be an educated person to expand my background, and I was trying to learn to like it. So I would buy albums, used albums, and just listen to them, and keep what I liked. Just let my liking be the judge. And I listened to this one over and over and over again. And in my mind, of course, I was 21, and I thought of him as a classical composer, and my education in classical music was beginning. And he was dated and wonderful, and he was born in 1866, and very old time. But on May 17th of this year, as I listened to the Writer's Almanac by Garrison Keillor, which is a 5-minute radio program every day, I now get it online in my mailbox, in which he honors the birthdays of people, and he tells about their lives, and he reads poems. 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And I learned that most of what I knew about Eric Satie was wrong. He was known for his piano pieces with exotic titles like Veritable Flabby Preludes for a Dog in 1912. He was accused of writing music without form. So he immediately composed a series of piano duets called 3 Pear-Shaped Pieces. That was 1903. I mean, I want to hang out with this guy. Many of his scores gave unusual instructions to the performers, like light as an egg, with astonishment, or work it out yourself. He was a friend of Picasso, and they collaborated on a ballet, which is called Parade, in 1917, which included typewriters and pistols and factory sirens and airplane engines in the orchestra. And he said, before writing a work, I walk around it several times, accompanied by myself. So, I was wrong. I thought about the Koi Pond Sound Project a couple of weeks ago. I thought about experimental music, I thought about John Cage, I thought about everything that we see as so contemporary, and I thought of the lines from the old song, everything old is new again. Everything old is new again. Here we go, the circle going round and round. And I also thought of the lines from Milton Erickson, the hypnotherapist, who said, unless you are willing to be confused about what you already know, what you know will never grow bigger, better, or more useful. And that's one of those quotes you've seen on board in my classes. And what I thought I knew about Eric Satie suddenly got bigger and better. I don't know if it was more useful, but it was more fun, for sure. And it was humbling, and I learned how strangely contemporary this classic composer actually was. What I knew about him was partial, and therefore it was partially wrong. It was partially right, too. It was partially wrong. And welcome to all the people that are arriving now. So my title might have been Learn to Learn, but I couldn't choose that title for 2 reasons. One is that we're always learning, and we don't have to learn it. I added the always learn because I believe it should and does never end. Some think they've stopped learning, but that's because they define learning too narrowly, too limited. Some think they don't need to learn anymore. Some associate learning with drudgery, with effort, rather than with aliveness, with embodiment, with construction paper and tickets. And some think you have to learn from other people or from classes, rather than from oneself or from the sky. One of my favorite websites is the Cloud Appreciation Society. It started in the UK, and they decided that clouds were getting a bad name. Oh, hi, Dave. It should be nice. And I said, come on, folks, look at the clouds. No two alike. Have a look. Notice the clouds. So some think, of course, that they stop learning. They don't get it, that you never can. You never can. But there's another, the other reason that I chose to always learn, learning to always learn, is that we don't need to learn how to learn. We just have to learn how to trust it again, the naturalness of learning, of what we always are, always are. We have to disconnect it with what we come to associate with, drudgery, force, what Charles Dickens called the grad grind approach to education in hard times. We also have to remove it from what's termed external motivation in the psychologist's term. Studies that were done at Stanford when I was a graduate student there that showed that children liked something less if they were rewarded for doing it, not more. Because they associated doing it with the reward, not with the internal motivation for doing it. So it makes you stop and think about what we're doing in our educational system to reward, rather than to elicit. To write narratives about people's work rather than to grade it. I think that all we need to really do is to unlearn how not to learn. To unlearn how not to learn, rather than learn to learn. We just have to focus on those brick walls that we placed in the path of our love of learning. And I use brick walls as the metaphor for a reason, because it's an homage to Randy Pausch. He said, the brick walls are there for a reason. They're not there to keep us out. The brick walls are there to give us a chance to show how badly we want something. Think about getting around that brick wall. If you're a karate master, you just kind of dismantle it. And there's a story that they were going to do a memorial pathway for Pausch after he died at his college because it was going to link the two buildings that he was most associated with, connecting the disciplines. He was an interdisciplinary, very creative teacher and academic in that way. And they thought that the great thing to do would be to build this path and then put a brick wall at either end. So you have to figure out how to get around it. So what are our brick walls? What stops us from learning? And how do we dismantle them? And how can we recall how badly we always wanted to learn? And when we got stopped? I think there's so many, but I want to talk about a few that came to my mind instantly. Things that stop us. One is the message that most of us got early on in life, as children, that we were not to be taken seriously. We've gone over this in some of my classes. Talk about those early messages. That we're like the Velveteen Rabbit in the children's story. We're waiting to become real. And I grow up healthy real. But we were always serious people. We always had big questions. Think about a big question that you had when you were a child, about death, or about loss, or about pain, or about the meaning of life, or about why am I here? And why is there war? I was very jaded at 15, very jaded intellectual at 15. I would have been ashamed to have Mr. Rogers or Leo Scott anywhere near me, even though I didn't even know them yet. I lived in my mind. I was rewarded for living in my mind. I was a star debater. That's why I went to UCSC undergrad scholarship. I got a lot of rewards for using my mind. Something was happening to my heart. Brick walls were being built around it at that time. So I'll never forget when we had a panel discussion in our junior international relations class in high school. And honey and Annie, when I sat up there on the panel and I made my case for war being inevitable, and my students are going, you don't say that. I didn't say that today in my lecture at 2 o'clock. But I said, well, the war's inevitable. And honey burst into tears and ran out of the room. All these years later, I remember that moment. She reminded me what I was forgetting. She reminded me to ground. That's sad. If war is inevitable, that's worth tears. That's worth bursting into tears now. Yeah. So that message that we don't ask serious questions, that we don't think about serious questions, we do. And she returned me to my fundamental question of why is there war and what can we do to stop it? The question asking muscle is a vital one. We all need to practice it. And my fear is that one of the reasons that we stop learning is that we stop asking questions. And so I ask oftentimes in class the question, First of all, think of important questions. And on your page, if you can think of an important question that you had as a child, write it down right now. Write it down. Think of it. A child broadly defined. Broadly defined. An important question. And then I asked, who could you talk seriously with about that question? Who could you go to, like a Mr. Rogers, who would take you seriously as a full human being? Not as cute, not as adorable, not as funny, not kids say the darndest things, kids are funny, not those programs, but straight on respect for our thinking. Who could you go to have that kind of conversation? And if you weren't taken seriously when you brought those serious questions, what happened to the questions? Did you stop asking them? Or worse, did you stop having them? Did you put them away? Like the way I put away my war question until I and Anne burst into tears. At some point, those questions go underground. If we're not lucky enough to live around people who take us very seriously, regardless of what our age is, we need to exercise that question-asking muscle. We need to use it all the time. E. Cummings, one of my favorite lines from him, said, always the beautiful answer who asks a more beautiful question. You see, so you're never going to run out of questions. Because the minute you get the answer, there's another question. Always the beautiful answer who asks a more beautiful question. And the second thing that came to my mind in terms of blocks in way of learning was the idea that school is the place where you learn. Instead of life. Life as an institution of higher learning. And it's the primary and sole place, or the most important place, and that teachers are in charge of or are responsible for that learning. That seems to be an enormous block to lifelong learning, to learning to always learn. Because if we don't have teachers anymore, what are we going to do? Take an online course? Yeah, you can do that. That's fine. But it's no impediment to learning. In our schooling, too often we learn to passively answer questions rather than to actively ask them. To ask our own questions, questions that matter, questions that really matter. And there's political implications to suppressing that question asking. Thomas Pynchon in Gravity's Rainbow said, if they can get you to ask the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. And you can think of some wrong questions that maybe you've had to ask in your college career or in your life. Like, how much money am I going to make if I choose that major? College was not supposed to be that. We understand the realities that make it that. Shouldn't be a cost-benefit equation. It was once a place where you could actually go to figure out, like I did, what I wanted to major in and try on 5 of them before I dropped out of school and came back in an entirely different one and whipped through it. So yeah, remembering that. And Barry Stevens, I want to give a wonderful tribute to Barry Stevens as well, who was a book called Person to Person that changed me when I was in that year out of school. I didn't know it was going to be the year I thought it was going. She said, telling children what is not known may be as useful, as helpful as telling them what is known. When I'm only told what is known, it seems so all there, already all there. Nothing I can contribute to it. I can only learn what others have found out. It's a closed one. But when I know how small the known is in relation to the unknown, the whole world opens up before me. I'm free to explore and to make my own discoveries instead of being a passive recipient of what is known, to the point that I think that everything is known by somebody else and that it's only through others that I can acquire knowledge. I found this by accident this morning. Accident. I was led to this quote. Any kind of language you want. I started keeping a quote file in the year that I dropped out of school. And I still have it. And I almost brought it today, but it's really big and heavy. It's a big old paper box that has this size quotes, cards in it. These things, 5x8 cards. And they were my old debate cards that I used to type quotes out when I was doing temporary secretary work. Where I had to sit and be a receptionist and smile all day, so I would just type all day these quotes. And I still have them. And so I thought, well, what did I value about learning when I started this file? And I reached in and I found this one. It took me back. I loved it at 19 and I love it at 62. Almost 62. July 18th, if you want to make it up. Nelson Mandela's birthday, which is a lovely birthday to share. A lovely man with whom to share your birthday. So always learning, and knowing that we have the capacity to learn, knowing that it just can't run out of it. There's a point in our lives when we know that at the very beginning. I had a 7-year-old daughter once. She's now a 34-year-old daughter. She feels very old. She was born during my first year of teaching here. And when she was 7, she said, there's always something we're learning every day. Every day. Like, do worms have mouths? She stopped me with that one. I thought, do they? I gotta go. It was pre-Google, so I couldn't go check it out. I had to go find a worm. Go to the encyclopedia. Now you're thinking about it too, don't you? So what else also stops us from always learning? I think this is the big one we all recognize it. It's thinking we already know. Especially the older we get, easier it is to think, been there before, nothing new. I know it all. And it's really close cousins, I think, to needing always to be right. Because if we know it all, if we already know it all, we're going to learn, right? It seems really close to me to needing to be right. Needing to be right. Funny story I told today about, in my morning class, about Rebecca Solnit, who wrote a book about a famous photographer, and she tells the story of being at a party, a cocktail party, and this man came over and said, oh, I heard you've written a few books, and she said, well, actually several books. Oh, what's the most recent one? Oh, it's about this photographer. And he says, oh, you should see this new thing that just came out, it's incredible. And he starts breaking down an argument about this to her. And her friend is standing there going, she wrote that. He's expounding because he already knows everything, right? He missed the part about, I just wrote a book on this, and heard I'm interested in it, and started to explain it. And that's how that works, when we think we already know, and we have to be right, and we have to be one up. And our educational system, now that we have lost our native evaluations, and now that we are wedded, committed, I don't like to use wedded as a metaphor that way, as we are joined to the grading system, we know how much that one up better than. I was raised in a system like that. When I got an A, the first question when I came home was, who else got A's? How many other A's were there? You know, so knowing that no matter how good you were, there's always somebody to be better than, right? That's the message. So I think that really obscures our learning. Do you agree with me? Do you think that's a bluff? Second one that came up, and I really like this one, is the fear of being simple. And that's, I think, what made me think about doing Mr. Rogers. I just can't call him Frank Rogers. I just can't. Mr. Rogers. And they was on it with me today. Because complicating things is seen as a smartness, a sign of smartness, a sign of intelligence, contesting it, interrogating it, even using words like that when all you mean is finding fault with and asking questions about. The jargon often is a stand-in for real intellect. You're taught to master the jargon. It's a very different thing to deconstruct something in the true postmodern sense that it is to simply analyze it. But if we use deconstruct, don't we feel smarter? Don't we feel like the teacher is going to be looking for that word? So there's a fear of just being simple, just using simple language. And to simplify can be seen as getting a real bad rap, you know? Except in mathematics. I love mathematics for this. Because simplicity is valued in mathematics. The best solution is always the most simple one, and the most simple one, the simplest one, is always seen as the most elegant and the most beautiful one. And I read about a mathematician recently who threw out his solution because it wasn't beautiful. It was right, but it wasn't beautiful. He wanted to keep going for the beautiful solution, which meant simpler. So there's two quotes that run through my mind a lot when I think about simplicity and being simple. One is by Alfred North Whitehead, a philosopher, who said, seek simplicity and distrust it. Seek simplicity and distrust it. And the other one is from a suicide note. I failed to simplify. That one went right to my heart when I heard about that in a book on suicide. Now the first from a philosopher is telling us that seeking simplicity is a path to wisdom so long as we distrust that simplicity. We don't settle too soon, we continue to probe it, we continue to investigate it. But the second, from a man who left behind the suicide note, I failed to simplify, explained why he could not find enough reason or a way to go on living. So let's not fear being simple. Let's not fear being simple. But let's not accept untested simplicity either. The easy generalizations we find on 24-hour news channels, where the so-called experts are called in immediately to tell us all the reasons for what happened. And let's also realize, I rely on this one a lot, that simplicity is an art. It's a clarifier. It's a guide. It's a means of focusing on what is essential. Like in the midterm, know the most important points. Like in life, what are you here for? What do you want to do with, as Mary Oliver the poet termed it, your one wild and precious life? What are you here to do? So simplifying. There's a Quaker song that came to my mind. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free. 'Tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when you find yourself in a place just right, it will be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we shall not be ashamed. To turn and to turn, it will be our delight, till by turning, turning we come round right. And a Buddhist said something like that too, Dogen. He said, when you find your place where you are, practice begins. When you find your place where you are, practice begins. We better have singing in a classroom either, too, right? People should be singing every time. Here to testify. First time I just burst into song in the classroom, somebody came up to me after, she said, oh, God, I was so relieved. I said, why? She says, you're a teacher, you start singing, what if it's really off key, and I have to sit there and listen to it? Like, oh, you can carry it to my face. It's in my blood. 3, doubting our capacity to learn. I think that's the other brick wall that came to my mind. 3 out of so many, just doubting our capacity to learn. When we were told, you're not the smart one, she's the smart one in the family, when we identified as incapable, when those intersectionality is a good word. It captures something. It's a good piece of jargon. It says race and class and gender, all these things, and physical difference, all these things, they all intersect. At this moment, am I woman or white? You know, it's intersectional. It's all those things. Or professor, right? Whatever. So believing that we should compare ourselves to each other, incorporating others' judgment. I'm a C student. What else do you think stops you from learning? Write it down. What else stops you from learning? Think about it. I spent my life, those are 3. And I'll post this for you and I'll email it to you so everything, all the quotes you'll be able to have and use. And I didn't want to use the overhead because the minute I did that, something gets lost. So I'll send it to you. And it's being taped too, as you're going to hear. So I've come up with some suggestions. I've devoted my life to an ongoing inquiry into how this works. It's always we. It's always we, because I'm a part of it. And the first thing I know for sure is the inextricability of teaching and learning. They're just not different. They look different. But your most alive teachers are the ones who are always learning. That's why I'm always mixing it up. That's why my syllabus does not tell you, on this day we're going to do that. It tells you what to read. And I try to keep up with talking about what we read, but sometimes because other things are happening, like age 20. Yeah. So we need to stop. We need to stop. Business as usual needs to stop. We need to take account of the world outside, because the other thing I believe about learning and teaching, be the same, is that this world is real in here. I didn't want to spend my life in an unreal world. That's part of why I quit college, dropped out of college. It just felt so unreal, particularly when the world was falling apart for us in 1968. You know the list of things that were happening in that year. And I just had to make it real. I had to be on the front lines in a certain way. But I found out that my calling is to be doing my activism in this room, in these rooms, with you, and also with me. And if I stop learning, it's not going to be happy for you, not going to be interesting for you. And if you stop learning, it's not very interesting for me. So when you turn in a paper that is just what I said in the last lecture, I'm going to say, do it again. What do you think about it, you know? So the construction paper is here for you to record whatever your thoughts are, not just what I'm saying, but your own thoughts, your own thoughts. Always be thinking about what you're thinking. And the ticket, what about the ticket? Also, we just need more construction paper in college. I'm committed to it. This was spontaneous this morning too. I looked down and I said, oh, I could do something with that. And then I looked at the tickets, so I give my grandsons tickets, so we can play lots of ticket games. They're 4 and 1. There's so much you can do with tickets, yes? And admit one. So I want you on the back of this ticket, before you leave tonight, you don't have to do it yet, is to pick out your favorite suggestion for how to keep learning. Not just for what I'm telling you, but also what you're telling yourself. And that will be your ticket to learning. I believe in puns. It's a very I just purchased a wonderful book at Bookshop Saturdays, which is all about the history and the art of the pun, including why we grow. Your ticket to learning. So admit one. Admit as many as you can, and more tickets are but something that you must remember. You know, for some of you, I know are graduating. How many of you are seniors about to graduate from college? Yes. Okay. A fair amount. Yeah, the applause. That's right. I want to remind you that commencement means to begin. Interesting choice. We're graduating from high school or graduating from college, but commencement is to begin the next phase of your life. So what is beginning? What is commencing? It's an end, but it's also a beginning. And my wish for all of you is that your learning may never end, and it may always be commencing. Here's my suggestions. Uh-oh. That was a time check. I will condense and send you all. Because I do want to have time for interaction as well. We are at 7:45, so we've got time here. One is to find a teacher. Now, the second part of that is many teachers in unexpected places. Because one of those teachers might be you. In fact, Rumi, the great Persian poet, said the only teacher you have that never leaves is you. That's the only one. Everyone else leaves. In one way or another. But don't neglect to seek out that one. In unexpected places, for me, it was the man that owned a veg shop in La Jolla. I went to La Jolla every weekend for a certain time in college. First of all, because I'd fallen in love there and he was no longer around. And secondly, because I could pretend I wasn't in LA. And there was an old man, a very old man called Herbert Ross, who owned a fudge shop, which was the best fudge I had ever tasted in my life. I've never found equivalent fudge. And all over the walls of his little shop, his wife had painted the towns of all of the places in the world that had ordered his fudge after visiting La Jolla. They had wanted more. And I talked to him. He was a survivor. He was a baby during the 1906 earthquake. And I've always been passionate about history. Not academically, just on my own, learning history. And he became a man with whom I exchanged postcards, and a man that showed me the value of honest work. That no matter what you did, it was possible to live a life of dignity and meaning. Making fudge, being a college professor. The second suggestion I have is to let all kinds of art enliven your life and your learning always. I love what Charles Darwin said in his autobiography. My mind has changed, he said, during the last 20 or 30 years. Now, for many years, I cannot endure to read a line of poetry. I almost lost my taste for pictures or music. My mind seems to have become a kind of machine for grinding general laws out of large collections of facts. If I had to live my life again, I would have made it a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music, at least every week. The loss of these tastes is a loss of happiness, and may possibly be injurious to the intellect, and more probably to the moral character, by enfeebling the emotional part of our nature. And so, my epiphany when honey ran out of the class, yeah? There's many ways of knowing. We have to respect them all, and to know that our learning is endless means that sometimes we learn by closing all the books and going and sitting under a tree, or looking at the cloud, or listening in solitude to ourselves, without our technology. 3, I want to confess, well, the suggestion is to learn a lot from love, but not everything. I devoted way too many of my adolescent, let's face it, later than that, years looking for love. In some of the right places, but some of the wrong places too. I went too much to relationship. I was a woman in this culture, hard to escape that. Heterosexual woman, doesn't matter. Woman. Men want love just as much as women do, but they have to do it more subtly. They can't lead with that. So learn from love, but learn from, know that it can never give you everything, and we have done ourselves such a vast injustice, I'm here to testify, by saying that one relationship can do anything more for you than be one relationship. It can't provide everything. And the wisdom of those who manage to stay in love for a long, long time is that they know that. And they make sure to learn from other things. 4th, generate your own thought. Don't only respond to the thoughts of others. And I've said that in a couple of ways already. But it can seem like learning is read, 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 take in, take in, take in. Internet, how many sides can you possibly keep up? It's overwhelming, it's impossible. It's not the world that I was born into. It's a world that has come to us. And that pull of the internet, you ever had a night where you go from one Facebook newsfeed to another and another, and that reminds me of, and that's good, and I'll look on this, and a couple of hours, you've learned a lot of stuff, but just went right through, just gone, because it wasn't integrated, because you didn't take notes on construction paper. So generate your own thoughts too. Generate your own thoughts too. The 5th one is to cultivate emptiness. Now, emptiness is a Buddhist term, of course. What it means is space in which creation can take place. We're terrified of the void in this culture. Eastern cultures are very good with the void. They understand. Out of emptiness comes creation. We're still learning that. And now that we have less and less and less capacity to be empty, to be silent, to be alone, I call people out in my classes almost every day for using their technology. Many of you know it. No matter how big the class, the presses stop. This press, the one that speaks, it stops until you put it away. Now, I know that people are not trying to be disrespectful. I know I'm dealing with an addiction. I know that people are checking their phones not because they necessarily are expecting a call or want to, but because they can't not. That's addiction. And we've got a tragedy of addiction occurring right now. So cultivating emptiness, letting space in your own life occur where you can think your own thoughts seems to be vital to this notion of lifelong learning. Next, find your own voice, but don't be attached to it. First of all, you gotta have a voice, you gotta find it. But then you find it and let it go. Okay, that's enough on that. You understand what I mean. We get used, we get attached to the you. One of our deepest addictions is to our self-image. We're all pretty addicted to thinking that this is who we are. I'm the smart one, I'm the pretty one, I'm the artistic one. That gets challenged. It particularly gets challenged when we face some kind of disability or some kind of sudden breakup where we have to stop and question everything and start all over again and recreate ourselves. Find your own voice, but let it go. Don't be attached to it. Be open. Trust your voice, but don't fall so much in love with it that you fail to hear others. Number 7, listen. A lot. On my core course syllabus, I would put these lines from Ernest Hemingway. When people talk, listen completely. Most people never listen. It's a very simple thing to say, but Ernest Hemingway said it, so I can put it on the syllabus, right? I can say I heard that at the bus stop. That's great. But when he says it, syllabus material. And it's not just listening to people, it's listening to other things. It's listening to yourself. It's listening to, dare I say it, your body. I'll throw in another piece of Buddhist wisdom. The master was asked, what is the secret of enlightenment? And he deeply disappointed his student by saying, when you're hungry, eat. When you're thirsty, drink. Yeah, and? No, that's it. The wisdom in that, and when we know we're going from class to class, there's no time to eat, and eating class, and the whole thing, and living those lives, and it doesn't get better when you're out of college, and many people are juggling many jobs right now, and we know it takes conscious effort to slow down and to stop, and to do less. 8 is to take life seriously, but have a good time. Oscar Wilde lived a tragic life by all accounts. He was in prison for sodomy. He had his books confiscated. His books were as important to him as mine are to me, even though I have nowhere to put them. And yet he said life is too important to be taken seriously. It's a nice paradox, isn't it? Take it seriously, but not too seriously. Remember to find joy. People are always surprised to see how much laughter there is in the death and dying class. It's supposed to be morbid and tragic. People should come out weeping every day. We laugh a lot. Why? Because it's about life. And because it's impossible to live a fully realized or meaningful life unless one takes account of mortality. 9 is to tell the truth as often as you can. It's impossible to tell it all the time. But if we tell it as often as we can, what we also cultivate is the capacity to tell the truth about what we know and don't know. I still catch myself acting like I know more than I do. Saying, oh yeah, that's a... I don't know. Nothing like being around kids to make you really realize how little you know. I remember, trying to explain to my daughter, or my son, how do the light come on? And I said, well, you go over the switch, you do this. Yeah, I know, but it's fine, that's all I got. Lest I be gendered, ask your dad. He actually did. I didn't. I had to go look it up. I still don't get it. But I tell the truth more easily about what I don't know. It gets easier and easier. Practice. Practice 3 I don't knows. I remember the first time in my early years of teaching when I said in front of a class when somebody asked me, I don't know, but I'll find out. And the person came up afterwards and said, I never heard a teacher say I don't know before. That's great. Oh, good. I'll prepare less for that. I'll find out. See you next time. But it's true. I'm being funny, but it's absolutely true. Because if we say what we don't know, then we also have room to go find it out, yeah? But if we're so committed to knowing it, there's no room. There's no room. 10, take interest in everything. Find interest in everything. Be interested. Be of interest, yes. But I guarantee that trying to look like your selfie, not interesting. And trying to fit a cookie cutter mold. I grew my hair long before it was popular. I just wanted to do that. My hair's been long since 1997. And now, long hair, right? Everywhere you look, long hair. Early adopter. I just didn't want to pay to get it cut all the time. I also wanted to see what color it would be. How would it turn out? So at any rate, it's the being interested. Let nothing be not of interest. And don't focus so much on being interesting. The best way to be interesting, and your interestingness will not come from your appearance. That's just not interesting. Maybe for 30 seconds. or 6 months, but be interested, be interested. I learned this so deeply from Leo. I also learned from Leo about his family life. He came from a big Italian family, very dramatic. I want you to go watch Leo videos. Because the man that was sitting with us on the floor with a few people there doing love class on Monday nights was the same man that was doing PBS specials and writing books and staying. He was famously called Dr. Hug because he would stay and hug every single person that wanted to hug him after a talk. And as his talks got bigger and bigger and bigger around the world, his record was staying for 5 hours to hug every person that wanted to hug. So Leo will tell the story about when he was a kid. There was a big Italian family, and at the dinner table, everybody, all the kids had to say something that they learned that day. And Leo thought this was a terrible bore. And so he would run to the encyclopedia right before dinner. And he would run back and get there just in time. And Leo, his father would say, "What did you learn today?" And Leo would say, "The capital is..." And his father would say, "Oh, Leonardo Felice, that's wonderful. Who knew that? That's fantastic." And finally Leo was just shamed into taking interest in everything. And his father's exuberance rubbed off on him. 11 is be grateful. We never run out of things to learn, ever. My friend Charlie Levine, who I wish could be here tonight, a lifelong learner. I met him at Lifelong Learners organization here on campus. And he has come for the last 3 years to my Deaf and Dying class on the last day to talk about what it is to keep on learning at past 90. Henry Miller said, "Life is continually providing us with new funds, with new resources, even when we are reduced to immobility. In life's ledger," he said, "there is no such thing as frozen assets." And I like that a great deal, because as we become more and more vulnerable to these ills that human flesh is prey to, we experience more and more immobility. The odds are, yeah. But to know that there are no such thing as frozen assets, we never are reduced, gives me the capacity to know that we can always, always, always learn. And finally, be yourself, because if you're not yourself, then whoever's learning isn't you. Yeah, it's silly, but it's true, isn't it? If you're so busy posing as someone else, then the true, genuine, naive, marvelous you that you are never gets to do it. And again, I'm thinking of Leo. So often, Leo would be told by students, "Oh, Leo, I want to be just like you." And he says, "You can't do it. I'm the best Leo Biscotti there ever was. You don't have a chance. Don't even try." But guess what? You get to be the best you. Nobody else can be it. And I want to close, and I will email you these points and post it, and etc. But I want to close with a story from Mr. Rogers. It has to do, I think, with learning less about how to win a race, whatever that race is, the race to learning, the race to income, the race to long life. My generation, the baby boomers, are trying to figure out how to live forever now. And it also has to do with learning which races are indeed worth winning and how to win them. And he told a story at a commencement speech at Dartmouth College. And a former student of mine, Yvonne Garcia, who is truly a lifelong learner, and who keeps in touch with emails all the time. What are you teaching these days, Wendy? You know, Katie knows. Send this to me. It's a story about how intimately related we all are, truly. We're not in this thing alone. The story about Special Olympics up in Seattle, where 8 or 9 so-called physically or mentally disabled young people were lined up at the starting line for the race. It was a 100-yard dash. And the sound of the gun went off, and they took off, running. But soon into the race, a little boy stumbled and fell. A little 8-year-old boy. Started crying, hurt his knee. And one of the children heard him and turned around, little Down syndrome girl that had Down syndrome, she turned around and leaned down and kissed his knee and said, "There, that'll make it better." And then all of them turned around and went back. They all went back. And they linked arms together. And they walked together to the finish line. And they all finished the race at the same time. And when they did, everyone in that stadium stood up and clapped and whistled and cheered for a long, long time. And people who were there still talk about that day with great delight. And Mr. Rogers says, "You know why? Because deep down, we know that what matters in this life is more than winning for ourselves. What really matters is helping others win too, even if it means slowing down and changing our course." I'm so glad to be able to share these words with you tonight. May you always learn to always learn. Let's have some questions or comments. So lovely to see so many people I worked with in very different contexts. Very different contexts, yeah. Yeah, what's on your mind? Lena.
Yes, I wanted to know, what, you always know that you wanted to teach, like, at this stage of life?
I always wanted to teach the grade that I was in. I was like in college, so. But I say that, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a teacher. When I was in elementary, I knew that I loved teaching. And I would play school in my garage when I got home from school. And I would bribe them, the kids, to come over and play school after school with chocolate cookies. And they would come over and I would set up chairs in the garage and I would make up worksheets that I could grade and correct. Least favorite part of my job now. Takes me forever to do. And they would play with me as long as the cookies lasted. And I looked back at that and I thought, we always were who we are. And I give this advice a lot to people of all ages who are searching, because we can be searching for what are we really here to do. Go back and figure out what were you passionate about as a child. That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to do that, but there's some clues there. There's some clues there. What did you naturally gravitate towards doing? There's some clues there. So I didn't know. I thought I wanted to be a writer, and I am a writer. But I write most of the time out loud, like I did tonight. I'm still waiting to get this book started. I've written a lot of stuff, but I just haven't. Yeah. Yes, Patrick.
So when we realize our own brick walls, how do we make sure we surpass those? Was also like making sure we help others win. So just only focusing on our own, getting wrapped up in whatever our own walls.
If we're focusing on our own brick walls, how do we make sure others win?
How do we make sure we don't get too entangled with those brick
Yes.
walls that we see as our own?
Yeah. Let me turn the question around. When's the time that you or anybody in here has found themselves entangled in precisely that dilemma? Too focused on achieving, so that you're not learning at all. Too focused on whatever the block is, so that you're not learning at all. Not helping others. Does anybody have an example of something like that in your life? You, Patrick?
Yeah, personally, just like focusing too much on whatever conception of success or conception of being successful, that oftentimes leads you to forget about the other people that otherwise could enjoy that success next to you.
Listen to yourself. Combining some of the advice of the 12 things, 12 steps. Listen to yourself, listen to your body, listen to how happy you are. When I finally decided to quit the tenure track and leave the research to Candace. Candy and I were, Candace West is here, and so sweet to see you. And we started teaching here a year apart. I was 78, she was 79, and she was always joking, she loved to do the research and I loved to do the teaching, so just, come on, we're double act. We're double act. You go do that and I'll go do this and we'll just work it all out. But I came to UCSC at a time when the culture was absolutely changing. It was, at that point, fancying itself into a research rather than a teaching institution. And so I was being given advice as a young tenure-track professor of how to take routes out of my office to avoid running into students so that I could have more time to focus. And when I got that kind of advice at a junior faculty retreat, I said, I can't do this anymore. I mean, it took me a year and a half to actually make the decision, because when you walk out, you don't walk back in. But I did get to walk back in as a lecturer. And I was very fortunate for that. And I also got the privilege of teaching in many other contexts that I never would have had. In community colleges, the West Valley, in Cabrillo, the Women's Reentry Program, doing work in the UK on poetry and storytelling workshops that I never would have had the time or the space or the energy, perhaps, to do. That's how I met Ben, student poetry. So many threads connect. So listen to your body. The reason I started with that story, Patrick, is that my body was telling me, get out of town. What fell apart? The body gives you the message if you're on the right track. All you gotta do is listen to it, right? That's hard. But all you gotta do, that's a big argument. So what happens? What do? I start developing TMJ. It's a jaw. Your jaw starts clicking. Your jaw's out of alignment. It becomes so painful that every time I open my mouth, my jaw has to click back in place. And then I start developing this painful nerve running all the way down my arm so that I can't write. And I'm on a plane going to a convention back east, and suddenly I can't even hold a pen. And I think, okay, I get it. I can't talk, and I can't write. That's what your work is. You need to reevaluate your path. And the path for me was to devote myself to teaching. Absolutely, in many different contexts, and to my writing as well. But if if it had been a different Santa Cruz, I might have, I would have gotten tenure based on what I'd already done. It would have been easy enough at that time because it was a culture of teaching. But I don't ever regret it. I never regret it. I never remember what I have. What else? So listen to your body. It'll tell you if you're not going for the right things. Yes.
I was really struck by when you said it takes conscious effort to stop and do less.
Yes.
Because when I try to do that, I find the feelings of anxiety
Yes.
come up about like, well, I'm not accomplishing this right now, or I can't take this time to do whatever because that's not, it's not work. It's not, the idea is about success and always being working towards something. So I wondered if you have any suggestions on kind of doing away with those voices or quieting those voices so that you can.
Oh yeah, I'd say that rather than that, I'd say listen to them. Listen to them. Let them wear themselves out, but know that they're voices. And ask them, what are they worried about? Here's what I mean. I read a piece that I never forgot. It's called The Watcher at the Gates, and it was a New York Times essay by Gail Godwin, a novelist. The Watcher at the Gates, and it was about confronting her voice that always said never enough, never enough. Whatever you've written, it's not good enough. Whatever you've done, it's not enough, it's not enough. You can do better, you can do better. And so finally she dialed with that voice and said, what are you worried about? I understand, you have a part. Editors have a part. The editing voice in us, the part that says, that's not good enough, do more. Very important. We don't want to be stoned all the time and not listen to that and, it's all good. No, it's not all good. It's really not all good. So much of it is not good. We want our critical thinking. And so what she found when she asked that question, what are you so afraid of? Why are you on me all the time, this voice? What are you afraid I'll do? And the voice said one simple word, fail. Ah, okay, thank you. You listen to the voice until you get enough distance from it to hear it's running its same thing over and over again, and the real message is it's got our well-being. Our mind is a very useful tool. Watch out for this, calculate this, judge this. But our heart, our being, our soul, our spirit, whatever else we want to call it, whatever language makes sense to you, is also very useful. And it's about balancing. My generation went way too far in the direction of disregarding the mind. And things got way out of balance. And what happened? Went back to the other extreme. We're still working on that one. So the idea, I think, is to listen to the message, not to silence it, not to quiet it, to say, why is this not enough? What would be enough? Guess what? Nothing will ever be enough. There are no arguments for that voice. The voice is always going to find something better you could do. Compassion, love for the self, dialoguing with the voice, having a conversation with it, I think allows us to say, great, I got the message, thank you for sharing. Now I'm going to just be my flawed little self. Not everything that is worth doing is worth doing well. Some things, it's just better to get it done. Like, Katie, do you have anything?
Yeah, I have my hand up. I was going to say thank you, Wendy, so much for the past 2 years and all the wisdom.
Has it been that long?
It's been that long, yeah.
No, I meant in here tonight.
Oh, no.
2 years.
Yeah, and I
You're a
remember,
student, yes.
I remember last year in your Death and Dying course, we had the assignment to create and practice downtime.
Mhm.
And
It was optional.
it was optional, but just the way you framed it with, but if you don't have time, you might want to question that too. And because we live in a society where everything is to be up and going, and that we're human doings and not human beings.
Yes.
That it just, by you suggesting that,
Mhm.
I've turned it into a practice,
Mhm.
and I see how beneficial it is.
Mhm.
On another note, in a lot of your classes, you use young adult literature.
Yes,
And
fiction.
fiction. I've always been curious how you incorporated that, or what brought that, how you thought of that.
We did homeschooling for 5 years with our children, and we read a lot. And I learned a lot about young adult literature and children's literature, which I knew nothing about because I was never a kid. I didn't like kids. I read adult books. I read my mother's cheap paperbacks, if that's all it was. So I didn't know about this field, and I discovered not only the contemporary young adult literature, children's literature, but classics, marvelous books. And so I got to learn through being a parent, and through being a parent in an atmosphere where we were putting to practice that everything is learning all the time. We didn't ever sit home. I always was feeling guilty about, need to do some worksheets or something, Life was learning. It was learning. You learn math by doing garage sales for Resource Center and violence and calculating the money. I mean, life is learning. They both went to school and did very well after that. So they had 5 years before that, and they both went to junior and high school and went on to college and got higher degrees. One of them did. One dropped out of college, and I was as proud of him as her. 30 years to the day that I dropped out of college, he calls me here and says, I don't think so. I want to read the Russian novels. There's not enough time to. So he did. He dropped out and read all the Russian novels he could get in. So we each have our own paths. Yeah, school is not for everybody, and it's always there to go back to as well. So I knew that there was a quality, because so much of my teaching is about connecting theory to experience. That there's a quality to fiction generally. I use adult fiction as well. But to young adult fiction, when I'm teaching, particularly about issues to do with youth, that takes you back there and you remember all those things that you have forgotten, that you have repressed. And you develop empathy, because you may not know what it's like to be a foster kid. Or you may know too well what it's like to be a foster kid. And you learn about what it's like to be a child of privilege. And fiction opens that door. So 2 reasons. I knew that it was, 3 reasons really. One, I knew that it was a way of developing empathy, which deepens our learning. It was secondly a way of bringing the theory alive. But thirdly, and I didn't do it for this reason, but the side effect was that I was discovering that people were saying again and again, this is the first time I've actually loved to read. Because I can remember. That's a crime. That getting a college education should take away your love of reading. So that's why I continue to do it. But it's really for the academic reasons. And I'm not alone. Many sociologists, many people use poetry and fiction in their teaching, but they're just few and far between. But I'm not the only one. Yeah. And then you develop a taste for it, and you keep reading it, And sometimes you find books on the bestseller list for adults that were written for young adults. It's a very hard to write for young adults. For several reasons, because it's got to be important, it's got to be real. And C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, said, no book is worth reading. No book is worth reading at the age of 10 that is not equally or more worth reading at the age of 50. That was the standard that he was trying to meet. Don't give kids junk. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes?
I just wanted to thank you for reaffirming something that I'm a student of Jody Green's last quarter, and we found that in our discussions talking about fiction that when people would raise their hands to say something, they always say, I think this, as opposed to just going right in and saying this. And it was just that idea of the fear of being simple or doubting the capacity to learn and not wanting to dedicate themselves to the thought and say, this is what it says to me. They would just intuitively say, I think it says this. And so it's just really cool, like in your lecture, how you really talked about we shouldn't have that fear of being simple and doubt that capacity to learn. The fact that we're all learning.
Thank you. And it was a very hard lesson for me because I was so attached to my intellect and I got so many rewards for it, you know. So to learn to be simple, I was kind of embarrassed of Leo at the start, like, oh, he's so simple. Until I learned that it takes a lifetime to get that simple, to say the important things. What else is on your mind? Yes.
You spoke about love and the differentiation of how important it is, but you can't learn everything from it. And so I noticed our society focuses a lot of attention on who we are in relation to relationships and post-relationships, what you've learned, what you're taking to the next one, and how your identity is supposed to change. And I'm wondering what prompted you to come to that realization and that differentiation that this is really important, but you see all these other things that are also important.
It didn't work. It didn't work. It always, I wish I had learned it a lot earlier than I did. It just didn't work. Ultimately, nobody can do it. They're always going to let you down. Ultimately, it comes from inside. Ultimately, the relationship can give you a sense of excitement and intrigue and joy and meaning and power, but ultimately you have to leave that with your own source. So it just failed. It failed. And I kept putting all my eggs in that basket. And then it would only last for a certain amount of time. And also, I remember when I was 21, I had an epiphany. I realized when I was 21, it was a good year. That year that I went back to school and had found this path. You know. And I thought, for the first time in my life, I left a relationship, and the first time in my life, I said, I didn't think of it as being between relationships. I let go of that conception. That's what people would say. It's like, well, I'm between relationships now. I was like, you're between a rock and a hard place, actually. But between relationships. And I said, no, I'm living my life. I'm not between relationships. I am sleeping with somebody or I'm not. Let's just get real, you know? I am in love or I'm not. See, the hookup culture had not really. Not to say it wasn't out there. It wasn't the modus operandi that it is now. I'm glad to say. But at any rate, it was that it didn't satisfy. Essentially, it didn't satisfy. And that the disappointment of that. And when I had that sense at 21, I mean, as I say, I had that, you know how you get the epiphanies and then you spend the next years living it through and say, oh yeah, that was right. I'm not between relationships. This is my life. I was right about that. I love reading my old journals. I have all my journals from when I was 12. That's the other books I love, all those walls of journals. And reading this and saying, wow, I knew so much more than I thought I knew. It's because it took me so long to live into what I knew. Yeah. That's how I learned. I'm still practicing. What else? Yes.
what do you do to take care of yourself or kind of protect yourself after learning or after a whole long day or a week of learning such heart-stirring, emotionally stirring material? Because as a sociology major, I feel like it's really hard for me not to connect emotionally with what I read. And sometimes, like in your class, I think, well, I've come to this literature and I'm thinking these thoughts because they're ready to be paid attention to.
Yes.
But
yeah.
sometimes at the end of the day, I'm like, this is a
I know.
lot of stuff. Like,
I know.
what do you do
Uh-huh.
to take care, to kind of wind
What
down
have you
for
found
yourself?
that works for you?
Well,
Are you struggling with for that? You haven't found it yet?
well, today I haven't written yet, so I keep a journal.
Yes,
So I've been writing, and I feel like
that's a touch.
it gets me.
Yeah. Well, the one route you can take is heavy drinking. Use of drugs. I find this is quite frequent. Another route could be YouTube cat videos. Probably the good things that cats do on the internet. And I know all these things are so because they represent. We call it mindless entertainment. Oh, I just wanted to chill. I was just surfing the internet to delay doing reading and doing that. The thing is, and yeah, heavy drinking, or even light drinking, right? Anything that can ease it. The satisfaction is in just stopping everything. The rest is in just stopping everything and listening to what wants to come. But with that do that you were talking about, Liza, more. The best thing and the wisest thing I've learned to do, and I'm still learning to practice it all the time, it's constant learning, is to just stop and listen. What's next? What wants to come next? What do I need next? Maybe I'm hungry. Maybe I'm not hungry and I'm eating potato chips. But that's okay because they're artisanal. Artisanal. So it's noticing that the instant move to something else is the problem. It's the moving on. I deserve a drink. I deserve some TV. I was raised in a house of TV. I was raised really, truly addicted to television. It was a very common thing in that era. And when I moved out when I was 19 to live alone after my first 2 years of college living at home, I couldn't get a TV. I could not have a TV in the house because I knew the level of my addiction to it, that would be my go-to place. And I had hoped that by this time, that would be historical, that I look at the freshman dorms, and I look at the campus, and I see people running in to watch the soap operas or the telenovelas or whatever, and I see the capacity to watch on everything all the time, and I say, oh, it's so much worse than it is. So stop. Just be tired. Take a nap. Go do some downtime. The funny thing about the downtime exercise is the suggestion that you spend 5 minutes, are you ready? 5 minutes to 10 minutes a week in a natural place. And simply sit quietly and observe natural change. It's not journaling, it's not writing, it's not thinking, it's not meditating. It's just sit in the same spot. Hard to find on this campus, huh? Oh wait, there's some. You find a place, you sit there in the same place, and you look at the same spot for 5 minutes a week. Do you see how comical that is? That it's a setup for people to say, I don't have time to do that. I say, great, so you get to learn that you don't have 5 minutes a week. How many cat videos did you see this week? Cat videos. It's perfectly so. So the stopping before the I deserve a break, I deserve to chill, where I regenerate when I'm truly alive is in just stopping and saying, what do I need next? And maybe taking a little break and just being quiet, or meditating, or being simple, or going out and looking at a tree, or just driving quietly. I'll find out, I've got more energy to read some more papers. Maybe yours. I've got some more energy I'm enlivened, but what I find is if I turn to those easy, numbing soporifics, I'm exhausted afterwards. You can watch TV for a whole evening and feel more lonely than you did at the start of the evening, because they're not really there. So it's the listening, it's the going within, it's the listening to what's truly going to heal me. And literature, I have so many books. It's so easy to acquire books at yard sales. The Friends of the Library book sale at Santa Cruz Library last week, at the end of the day, I don't like the expression, I use it for actually meaning the end of the day. It was really the end of the day, at 3 o'clock, at the end of the day, $5 for as many books as you could get in a shopping bag. And my friend came home with about 65 books that he crammed into 3 bags for $15. Why do we do books? So there's ways that you can build a library without having money. There's also the library when you got home. One of my missions in teaching is to take people to McHenry and say, look, books. It's lovely, but it is so, I find a deep rest in reading, in literature. Is that filling me up with more stuff I need to know? Sometimes what it does is it works other parts of my brain, or writing, or having a lovely long meal. I love to take 2 hours on a meal. Conversation, you know. 1 glass of wine lasts a lot longer when you drink it slowly. So those are some ideas, and I know you have some too. I want to remind you to take as many tickets as you want for as many reminders as you want before you leave. One last one, Lena.
I just wanted to ask, I'm not really about books. I have this long list of books that people recommend me.
You'll never read them all.
But it's more than that. It's, I mean, as a kid growing up, teenager, I loved going to the library and, finding those books and just diving in and bring like 12 home at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm a college student, I barely have time to read all the readings that I have for classes. And most of my friends or classmates have told me they have to cut class or to catch up on material. So what do you suggest for all of us who are in school and who are just trying to get a pass or do really well and still have time to do?
Especially when you're working several jobs and it's very, very difficult. What you can do is keep the list for later. Keep the list for later. Think about what you want to do later. So you're accumulating your possibilities. Friday is so lovely to see you. Accumulating your possibilities. And also, you can read small things that give you a break. That's where you learn about literature, is you can read it very quickly. But it's deep, you know. Or magazine articles, magazines that we got, or poems. Poems, yeah. So there's other ways that you can feed yourself with smaller doses of that. And read about things that you have no idea about. Expand in that way. It's really been such an honor to talk to you all and to come out on May 29th, so close to the end of the quarter, and for all of you that came from downtown and from the distant past. It's lovely. Project, thank you so much for organizing this. It's been
But also, I'd like to give you our token of appreciation just for the
sweet.
talk itself. So thank you so much for coming.
That's so sweet.
And thank you all for coming as well.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that was the last